Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
It is a fantastic job. It is journalism in real time. These stories are happening in front of you, and you're trying to interview the key players, you're navigating through live pictures, you're in a sense guiding the audience through, trying to make sense of what you're seeing. And we're living in an extraordinary time for news in terms of the magnitude of stories. But it's not just the heavy lifting. There's science, there's technology, there's trends, there's culture, there's sport. And what you're trying to do constantly is to blend all of that, the interesting stuff, the stuff that people are talking about, the fun stuff. You're trying to blend that into your shows. And I love news. I'm a news junkie, and when I think back as a kid at school, you know, I was the one that was watching the budget programme live on my own, obviously, but now you get to be actually doing it. I mean, I love this job. It is perfect for me.
The latest there from our Europe regional editor, Paul Moss. You're watching BBC News.
I have interviewed fascinating people right across the planet, whether that's heads of state or global leaders, from the US Secretary of State to the Dalai Lama. But the most famous person I interviewed was the film star Angelina Jolie, soon after her divorce from Brad Pitt. And we did the interview in Cambodia, where she was doing a documentary film about the Cambodian genocide. I think the most important thing when interviewing people is to make it clear that there are no questions that are off limits, that you can be free to ask anything. So whether that's dealing with an authoritarian leader or a film star, there are never any pre-arranged questions or pre-agreed upon questions. I'm always free to ask whatever I want. That's really how I conduct my interviews and how I deal with the people I'm interviewing. I like to often build a connection as well, and I think you get much more out of the people you're interviewing when you can empathise.
You're with BBC News. Now, former US President Donald Trump is expected to fly into Manhattan later today to face charges over hush money payments to a former porn star. Live from London, this is BBC News. Russia detains a woman after a pro-Kremlin blogger was killed in a bomb blast at a cafe in St. Petersburg. Russia's Wagner mercenary group claims it now controls the embattled Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, but Kyiv insists its forces still hold it. Schools in England face further closures as the UK's largest teaching union rejects the government's pay offer and calls for further strikes. The man who shot and killed a 9-year-old schoolgirl in northwest England last year will be sentenced for her murder later. The former president of Kosovo and 3 other ex-leaders plead not guilty to war crimes during the fight for independence from Serbia. From centre-left to centre-right, Finland's Conservative leader Petteri Orpo wins a nail-biting 3-way election race, defeating Prime Minister Sanna Marin. Hello and welcome, I'm Ben Thompson. Now, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
There are people, both young and old, who simply do not know that people of colour fought and died alongside their British counterparts in both world wars.
A large crowd gathered to remember a generation who crossed oceans to help Britain during World War II.
Nothing short of a disgrace that the service of these brave men who came all those thousands of miles from the Caribbean to help this country in its hour of need has been pretty much erased from the history books.
Glenn's uncles came over from the Caribbean to train with the RAF in nearby Hunmanby. He wanted a memorial for them and thousands of others who volunteered to serve.
Oh, very good, very enlightening, and I hope people do take notice.
I'm proud. My God, I am proud to meet a few of my comrades. You know, some is missing, obviously.
You're live with BBC News. Oil prices jump after OPEC Plus shocks markets by cutting oil output. Saudi Arabia says the cuts are to support stability. Factory output in Asia is hit by weakening demand, but what does it mean for the economic recovery of the region? And we'll speak to the man who made the world's first ever mobile phone call 50 years ago today. Hello, very warm welcome to World Business Report. I'm Ben Thompson, and we're going to start with that surge in oil prices, and that's after the world's largest exporters announced a surprise cut in production.
Live from London, you're watching BBC News. Russian investigators detained this woman, Daria Tropova, in the hunt for the killers of a pro-war blogger in a blast in St. Petersburg. His lawyers say he's gearing up for a battle. Donald Trump will fly from Florida to Manhattan in the next few hours to face charges over hush money payments made to a porn star. And these teachers say we're overworked and underpaid. They reject the government's pay offer in England and call for further strikes. Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. We start with the audacious attack that killed a well-known pro-Kremlin blogger on Sunday. Russian investigators have now detained a 26-year-old woman, Daria Tropova, in connection with the murder and the explosion in a cafe. Vladan Tatarsky was killed by a bomb in St. Petersburg. Media reports say the explosion occurred shortly after he had been given a statuette. This happened in a cafe. It was handed to him by a woman. Now, Daria Tropova had previously been detained because she had taken part in protests against the war in Ukraine. Russia's security service accusing Ukraine of being behind the blast. But what we've heard from Ukraine, officials there are absolutely denying this. But who is this man, Vladan Tatarsky? Why might someone want to kill him? Well, for a start, it's not his real name. Tatarsky is actually Maxim Fomin, an ultra-nationalist. He's got links to the hard right and to other politicians in Russia as well. And his rhetoric has been extraordinary at times, sometimes very heavy criticism of Russia's so-called military operation in Ukraine. So it's fair to say that he may have enemies on both sides. Do stay with us. More coming up on the Finnish elections. We'll be live across Finland.
Hello, good afternoon. We started off on a chilly, frosty note for many earlier on this morning, but there's a lot of sparkling spring sunshine and blue skies around today, as captured by our weather watchers here in northeast England and in northern Wales.
This is BBC News, the headlines. NATO says Finland is to join the military alliance on Tuesday. Russian investigators detained this woman, Daria Trepova, in the hunt for the killers of a pro-war blogger in a blast in St. Petersburg on Sunday. His lawyers say he's gearing up for a battle. Donald Trump, due to fly from Florida to Manhattan in the next few hours to face charges over hush money payments made to a porn star. And they say they're overworked and underpaid. Teachers in England reject the government's pay offer and call for further strikes. Let's just take you back to Brussels because NATO ministers are meeting a little later this afternoon, and Jens Stoltenberg, there he is, the head of NATO, has been discussing the war in Ukraine. But the big announcement from him today is that Finland will join NATO, formally join the alliance on Tuesday.
Today at 1, more strikes in schools in England after teachers overwhelmingly reject the government's pay offer.
The number of our members that rejected the government's pay offer is 191,319.
Good afternoon. Schools in England are facing more strike action after members of Britain's biggest teaching union overwhelmingly rejected a government pay offer.
At the heart of this is also a debate over school funding. £2.3 billion extra cash is going to schools in the next 2 years, and £500 million more next year to help towards pay. But there are other significant pressures too.
Energy bills, inflation on food. Just the general cost, the increase, just as for everybody else, the prices have gone up incredibly high for schools.
This word is incredibly important.
With no settlement on pay, uncertainty and disruption lie ahead. Today, the Prime Minister said the rejected offer was fair.
In spite of all of that, and I said very reasonable offer on pay, the NEU union has rejected that, announced new strike dates, which will be enormously damaging to our children who have already suffered, their education has already suffered as a result of COVID, and in the run-up to exams, to hear about new strike dates in the face of what is a very reasonable pay offer.
Well, I'm disappointed that it's come to this, and I know many parents will be really worried about upcoming strikes. What I want to see is everybody getting around the table and resolving these issues. They can be resolved, and the sooner they're resolved, the better.
There are 3 weeks before the next strike.
You're watching BBC News. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. I'm going to steer you through our coverage for the next 20 minutes, half an hour or so, because we are expecting the sentencing of Thomas Cashman. He is the man who shot and killed 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, and we are expecting that sentencing to be televised, the judge in vision on camera at some point reasonably soon. So we're going to cross live now to Manchester and the Crown Court there, and we can speak to our correspondent, Rowan Bridge. Hi, Rowan, just talk us through what we're expecting.
Yeah, so this, as you say, is going to be the sentencing of Thomas Cashman, the man who was convicted on Thursday of the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, the 9-year-old from Dovecot in Liverpool, who was fatally shot in August last year.
Just marking your card when you're watching at home there, we can see to the side of me there, those are the live pictures of Manchester Crown Court, where we have just heard that sentencing. Our correspondent Rowan is there, but we will be back with Rowan in just a moment. We're going to go to Daniel Sanford for a bit of reaction on actually what Rowan was talking about, which is the sentencing of 42 years. And just before Daniel, I get into that, it was interesting the contrast here between the UK and the US, of course. We have both covered big court cases in the United States where there are cameras in, and the sentencing. I'm sure there's a very recent court case where the sentencing process and the remarks from the judge are quite different. They are much more informal, asking questions and going off script. That didn't happen today. That doesn't happen so much in the UK. That just struck me as quite a difference. But Daniel, your thoughts and reflections after having listened in to that sentencing.
Yeah, first of all, as you say, when the sentencing remarks are made, it is quite a formal process. There's lots of user-friendly language in there, but it's quite a formal process and done in a quite a dispassionate way. There may have been some more abrupt exchanges early on that we were hearing about, where she was questioning some of the arguments being made by the defence. But when it comes to passing sentence, that is done in a formal and dispassionate way.
From London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump is set to leave his home in Florida to fly to New York to face charges related to alleged hush money payments to a porn star. The man who shot 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in her own home in Liverpool is given a life sentence for her murder with a minimum of 42 years. Finland will officially become a member of NATO on Tuesday. The move is seen as a major strategic setback for Vladimir Putin. And the moments before a pro-war blogger was killed in an explosion in St. Petersburg, a 26-year-old woman has been detained by the Russian authorities. Well, welcome to BBC News. Let's return to those events in Florida, Mar-a-Lago, because we've been showing you the pictures for the last little while at Mar-a-Lago, seen Donald Trump's home, the gate open, because we are expecting in the next few moments, if we are following the time schedule laid out by the former president, to see Donald Trump leave that building and head to the airport and then begin the journey to New York.
Today at 6, a man who murdered a 9-year-old girl in her own home in Liverpool last year is sentenced to at least 42 years in prison. Olivia Pratt-Korbel was shot in the chest by gunman Thomas Cashman, who was chasing a fellow drug dealer. Good evening. The murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel in her own home in Liverpool last year by a gunman who was chasing a fellow drug dealer shocked the entire country. Survivors of the Manchester Arena attack are taking legal action thought to be the first of its kind against a conspiracy theorist who claims the attack was faked. Martin and Eve Hibbert, who are left with severe disabilities after the 2017 blast, are suing Richard D. Hall for defamation and harassment. Let's hear more on this from our correspondent Mariana Spring, who's in a new hub above the newsroom, bringing together our experts on disinformation and fact-checking.
This is Martin Hibbert. He survived the bombing at the Manchester Arena that happened back in 2017 and killed 22 people. Martin and his daughter Eve were left severely disabled after the attack. And since then, they've been targeted with conspiracy theories and hate that have denied what happened, suggesting the attack was staged and that they were somehow lying about their injuries. Now Martin has launched legal action against this man, Richard D. Hall. Last year, I revealed how this conspiracy theorist targeted Martin, Eve and other Manchester Arena survivors. He even posted online about how he tracked them down to their homes and workplaces to see if they were lying about their injuries. That case is not dissimilar to this one that played out over in the US.
And that is all from us. You can, of course, keep up with all the latest developments on the BBC website. From the 6 o'clock team, it's goodbye. But the news does, of course, continue here on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Bye-bye.
Tonight at 10, Donald Trump lands in New York, where he's about to make history as the first former president to be charged with a criminal offence. He touched down a short while ago and then headed to Trump Tower in Manhattan, ready for the court appearance tomorrow. Good evening. A short while ago, Donald Trump landed in New York, where for the first time in the history of the United States, a former president will be charged with a criminal offence.